and you kind of keep the water trickling in. The person that's on the bottom end of that towel is experiencing a sensation as if they're being drowned. And it's not a very pleasant sensation, but they're not going to be drowned, but they think they're going to be. And because you're it's kind of like being in a tight space, but that tight space is just a towel that is saturated with moisture. And there seems to be more moisture coming in, and you just think you're going to drown any second. So that's really what waterboarding is. And people really break very quickly under those conditions. KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, was waterboarded several times. He was one of only 2 terrorists that I can think of that was waterboarded. He was waterboarded several times. And according to certain administration officials, information that was received as a result of that was useful and did prevent future subsequent terrorist attacks. So, you know, I'll leave it up to your own interpretation. I'm not sure. I don't condone torture. The reason I don't classify it personally as torture, now you can call it torture all you want, because I want your opinion. I hope you understand that. I mean, if that's your opinion, then that's your opinion. I don't condone torture. But I also don't condone people coming in and blowing up our citizens either. The reason I don't think it's torture is because, like I said, we've gone through the training, and it was done to us. You think we're going to torture our own soldiers when we put them through training? Anybody that goes through Navy SEAL training is arguably being tortured going through the training. That is very hard training.
Marine Corps boot camp.
Ranger training in the Army. I mean, General Casey, former Chief of Staff of the United States Army, when he was going through Ranger training, his feet were like hamburger. I mean, they were just gone. And he was force marching himself. He kept calling himself names just to keep himself going. But if you would have looked at his feet, you would have said, we tortured him. So, you know, torture to me is a relative term. I don't think we should pull people's fingernails out. I don't think we should do things to people that we're going to make them permanently disabled or whatever. I just don't think we should do that. That's not what we're about. So, I digress very much so, I'm sorry. Cruel and unusual punishment. When you get pulled over for a traffic violation out here, for doing 5 miles over the speed limit, and you get hauled into jail because you didn't have your driver's license with you, didn't have proof of insurance, didn't have your registration, so you get hauled into jail, you don't expect to be sentenced to 5 years in jail for that infraction out there, do you? That would kind of be unusual punishment. You expect the punishment to fit the crime. That's kind of what this is all about. The Fourth Amendment and the protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, we have what is called the plain view doctrine. What is reasonable with regard to how we're conducting searches? How many of you know what the plain view doctrine is? Well, so-and-so, a police officer's walking down the sidewalk, off duty or whatever, doesn't matter. And he's walking along campus and looks up in this dorm room, and he sees this beautiful, well-nurtured marijuana plant growing in a co-ed dorm room. It's beautiful, nice and green, leafy, and it's illegal. And so the police officer goes up there, knocks on the door, and says, "You're growing marijuana in your room. It's illegal. I'm not only taking possession of it, I'm arresting you. And I also have reason to expect that maybe it has little brothers and sisters somewhere in your room. So I'm going to search for those little brothers and sisters of that big nice plant over here." That's based on the plain view doctrine. Same thing's true when you get pulled over. It's always arguable about when they cannot get into your trunk because it's locked and it's a secure part of your vehicle. It comes down to their reasonable expectation of what caused them to want to look into your trunk. What was your behavior? What did they smell? What did they suspect? All those types of things. Besides that, most police officers, when they pull you over, can probably get a warrant, a search warrant, probably before they even get out of your car and come up to your car. they get out of their car and come up to you. It's already going to be electronically sent to them. Yes.
Okay, I know that you're in plain sight, so in your car, but what about a female's purse or our backpacks? Do they have a right to because those are in a...
Again, there's all, and I'm not a lawyer, this isn't a law course.
Right.
But it depends on what the circumstances are. It's the reasonableness of what's happening.
Okay.
The probable cause also. So there's all kinds of extenuating circumstances or variables that need to be taken into consideration. It may be necessary for someone to look into a woman's purse. That's why some people, when they're running from the police and they have a backpack and they don't have a billfold or something there can identify them, they'll just kind of pitch the backpack and hoping that it's in the general domain, so that backpack won't be tied to you.
Okay.
So there's all kinds of games that are played or whatever. So. But Fifth and Sixth Amendment has to do with fair trial and right to counsel. One of my students asked me a very good question on Friday at 1 o'clock and tried to make a case that plea bargaining basically forfeited the right to a trial. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, you have a right to a trial, fair trial. A plea bargaining is what's available to prosecutors to offer somebody a lesser sentence for that person pleading guilty to maybe another crime or a lower level crime. But the person didn't have to accept that plea. They could have accepted the trial by jury. So you're not forfeiting your rights under the Bill of Rights. You don't have to accept the plea. Now, the tactics that prosecutors sometimes use make it feel like you better accept the plea or else, but those are just tactics, but it's a contract. A plea agreement is a contract between you and a prosecutor. That's all it is. If you accept the plea, if the evidence is stacked up against you, if you go to trial, chances are you're going to serve 20 years. If the evidence is stacked up against you. If your attorney says, well, it's not looking good for you, Joe, we better try to go for a plea with the prosecutor's office. Hopefully the only thing you'll have to worry about is 18 months, but that's not 20 years. So will you plead at 18 months? Okay. The evidence is compelling against me. I didn't do the crime. You have a decision to make, right? If you go to court, things aren't going to look for you. If the prosecutor has a case and they know they can prosecute you, you're going to go to jail for 20 years. So there's all kinds of tactics that are used with regard to the Sixth Amendment. So the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments are dedicate procedural protections for the accused. So where do you stand? Do you favor or oppose the death penalty for persons convicted of murder? We have different things to consider, don't we, with regard to death penalty? A gentleman was just, the Supreme Court basically stopped the execution of an individual last week because of his mental capacity. Should we should we kill somebody through capital punishment if they do not understand perhaps what they are guilty of or what is getting ready to happen to them? Some people look at capital punishment, you get put to death because you killed somebody else or you were a part of the process of killing somebody else. That's the reason you get the death penalty. You don't get it for crossing in a no crosswalk zone. You get it because you committed a capital crime. Is it an eye for an eye? Is that justice? Or is life in prison without parole, where you go and become a ward of the state for the remainder of your life? Justice. That's a taking, right?
But then there's so many other things to consider.
consider like having to pay for that person the rest of their life.
That's why, that's the reason I put that out there. I wanted you to say that. Right. So what is fair? What is just?
And it's not like putting someone to death is cheap either.
It's not. It's very expensive to try a capital crime.
It's gotta be cheaper than paying for the rest of their life.
It is, but it's not very much.
The appeals process leading up to the execution is very, very expensive.
We debated this.
It's not, there's not an easy answer, is there?
And plus, doesn't the execution trial sometimes go wrong too?
Pardon me?
Doesn't the execution go wrong too? Like
Well, we've got our techniques down better. I mean, it's not as painful as it used to be. Is that what you're talking about, the actual execution itself? I mean, there were horrible, horrible instances in the past where people were electrocuted, but they lived. I mean, that has to be horrible. People that if they would have just held their breath for another 5 seconds, they would have survived the gas chamber. People that were hung and hang, right, and they had a problem. So there, hopefully, but the techniques, the technology and everything has gotten better, and who knows. Lethal injection is for that reason. Kind of makes you unaware of what's happening to you before the bad stuff really puts you away. We kind of talked about this. So I don't think I really got your feedback. Do you have a problem with anybody listening to your conversations if they're doing it for purposes of national security? I can't think of a single thing that I say that I shouldn't be willing to take responsibility for. Anything that comes out of my mouth, I have to expect somewhere along the line somebody's going to hear it or hold me accountable for it or whatever the case may be. What's wrong with that? Because my reasonable expectation of privacy is I have very little in this day and age. You know, back when I was your age, most people in this room, the Social Security number was not for purposes of identification. Now, it's one of the first things they ask you for is your Social Security number. I hate giving that up because I was told it was never going to be used as an ID number. When you put pieces of information together, like name over here, address over here, Social Security number over here, and birthday over here, you put all those together and you can collect those from different points if you really look hard enough. You put all that information together, there's very little that you can't do with regard to knowing about that individual. Personal identity theft, that type of thing. There are several different aspects of the Fifth Amendment. The Miranda rights basically require officials to remind criminal suspects of their Fifth Amendment rights. Miranda was a case back in the 60s that basically law enforcement had to inform you of what your constitutional rights are. When you have a right to a jury, you have a right to an attorney, on and on and on. If you can't afford one, the court will appoint one for you. You have the right to remain silent. If you do not remain silent, everything you can say it will be used against you in a court of law, on and on and on. I used to walk around with that in my billfold in case I had to arrest soldiers, which I had to do, and I had to read them their Miranda rights. There's also one other aspect of the Fifth Amendment. We'll end with this for today. We'll finish this up and get into Chapter 5 on...
Wednesday.
Is this Chapter 5? 4?
It's 4.
4. We'll get to Chapter 5 on Wednesday. But I want you to look at the last comment in the Fifth Amendment. That's referred to as the Takings Clause. The Takings Clause. We're going to talk about the Takings Clause on Wednesday. And then we'll kind of finish up Chapter 4 and get into Chapter 5. And I hope I've got a talkative, energetic, enthusiastic group, so I don't have to do all the talking.